Education spending was one of the big points of difference, but Republican Senate President Matt Huffman announced there was a deal on that on Wednesday. I talked about that with Paul Imhoff, Director of Governmental Relations for the Buckeye School Administrators Association, Ohio's Association of School Superintendents, and until January, he was the superintendent of the Upper Arlington City Schools.
We're hearing that the final budget deal might include the House's K through 12 funding package and the Senate's universal vouchers plan. So let me ask you first about that K through 12 funding package out of the House versus the Senate's. The Senate's budget would have cut the House's budget's funding for public school districts by $541 million, $500 million.
That is correct. That's
so
correct.
There's obviously a preference that you have here.
Well, certainly, we prefer the House version. We think the House version was fair, and it was an appropriate level of funding for our public schools. And you just said it. It was when we look at the Senate version, it was $541 million less for our traditional public schools, but $372 million more for vouchers. And so definitely was much more money going to school choice in the Senate version as opposed to our traditional public schools.
So let's talk about vouchers. The House had
Sure.
extended Mike DeWine's proposal to expand the Ed Choice voucher program from 250% of the federal poverty level up to 400%, which is about $1,000 a year for a family of four. The Senate then expanded that to all families in the state, but added in means testing. So the more money you made above 450% of the federal poverty level, the less voucher value you would get. A report from the Ohio Education Policy Institute, which does research for school groups like yours,
Yes.
said that increased spending on private school vouchers by $372 million accounts for 37% of the total increase in K through 12 funding. So is this a deal? If you've got the House's K through 12 spending and universal vouchers, is this a good deal in your opinion?
I think the issue that we have with the voucher legislation, whether it was the governor's version or whether it was the House version or the Senate version, we are not against choice. We are not against choice. We are for accountability and for transparency. So, for instance, when we look at the Senate version of vouchers, that's another billion, counting all of the programs current in the ad. That'll be $1 billion a year on school choice with very little accountability or transparency. And we do believe when taxpayer dollars are being spent, especially to the level of $1 billion a year, that there has to be both accountability and transparency. And we also think about this, Karen, I am a parent, okay? And I'm trying to make the best choice for my child about where I would like them to go to school. And parents have a right to make those choices. That is very important, very important. But as a parent, I can't make that choice unless I have the same data set on all of my taxpayer funded options. And basically now all of them are taxpayer funded. So we really believe the accountability has to be there and the transparency. And so as we look at this too, I think the other thing is we aren't talking about all of the numbers. So when we talk about these voucher amounts, that's only a part of it because our chartered non-public schools also receive auxiliary services money and administrative cost reimbursement funds totaling almost $1,400 a year. So we have to add that amount of money to the voucher to determine what the taxpayer level of support is for these schools.
And when you're talking about the taxpayer level of support for public K through 12 schools versus other options, most students in Ohio are in public K through 12 schools. Is there a balance here that you think is off?
So yes, I do think there is. So when we look at the funding, especially the funding levels that were proposed in the Senate budget, there was a cut of $541 million as opposed to the House version for the 80% of children who attend a traditional public school, because this money goes to kids. And then there was an increase of $372 million for the 10% of kids who attend a chartered non-public school. Now, all of these kids are incredibly important and they are all our kids, but we do have to make sure that we are funding all of our kids at an appropriate level. And when you see that kind of cut for the 80% and that amount of an increase for the 10%, it brings up a lot of questions.
The Ohio Education Policy Institute report says the Senate budget that modifies that funding plan in such a way that local property taxpayers could be responsible for funding 61.5% of a school district's base funding, while the state will now fund only 38.5%. Now, that may not be what we finally see in the budget, but I thought some of this was already resolved with the Duralf decision and the whole idea of the Fair School Funding Plan, taking away that reliance on local property taxes.
Well, Karen, I think you're really hitting a very good point here. As we think about, there always has been a balance between what the state does and then what the local area does, and that is as it should be. But in the Senate budget, that balance is really shifting more and more to local property taxpayers and less from the state. And how they did that was by a change in the Fair School Funding formula, also known as Cup-Patterson, and they changed the capacity part of that formula to make school districts look wealthier, thus reduce the state share. And what that also did through that change in the formula is it made the formula more volatile for us. And so one of the things that is really important for our public schools is to make sure there is certainty in the level of funding we are going to receive, so we can plan for the next year and 2 years and beyond programs we're going to offer for kids. And so by introducing more volatility and less certainty into the funding formula, which is what the Senate budget does, it really works against that. And that's a problem.
And again, that is the Senate budget.
That is the Senate budget. And again, what we're hearing today is we're going to be going with the House budget as it relates to the traditional K-12 funding. And we are very pleased, and we're certainly hoping that that's the way this turns out.
One of the things that appears to be in the final budget bill, at least what we're hearing, is Senate Bill 1, which is similar to House Bill 12. It renames the Department of Education, the Department of Education workforce, also strips power away from elected state school board members and gives it to the governor. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will tell you, as an organization, we have not taken a position on this issue. So, as you know, we represent public school superintendents all over the state. And the reality is our public school superintendents are split on this. And so we have served as an interested party. And so we have advocated for a number of things. One of them is in the proposal, there will be a deputy director of primary and secondary education, and then a deputy director who's in charge of our career tech schools. And those are crucial positions in the new structure. So we advocated for, and we were pleased that the Senate added it to Senate Bill 1, that the people who are in charge of those positions have experience, have an educational background, have experience running something as large as that, because this would be one of the largest departments in state government. And so that was very, very important to us. The other thing that is very important to us at the end of the day, so whichever way this goes, we need an educational agency that is supporting our public schools, especially when we talk about literacy. We are very supportive of the literacy efforts in the budget. Many of our schools have been practicing and implementing the science of reading for years. And we are just very, very pleased to get this level of support from the governor and from the General Assembly. But at the end of the day, we are most concerned with the level of support that is going to be coming from whatever agency is responsible for our schools.
Also, I wanted to ask you about the Senate requesting State Auditor Keith Faber asking school districts about how much money they've provided to support the lawsuit against vouchers. The group Vouchers for Ohio said in a statement that, quote, Mr. Huffman and Mr. Faber are walking a fine legal line here, and here's our advice: be careful, or better yet, back off. This is a pretty big and unprecedented request, is it not?
Well, I will tell you this, and I was just talking about accountability and transparency when it comes to our chartered non-public schools, and I can't say that 2 or 3 minutes ago and then not say, I believe the same thing about our public schools. So I do believe that our public schools are funded by taxpayer dollars, and that means anyone has a right to know what we are spending our money on.
Are you concerned what that information will be used for?
Well, I think that was already information that was publicly available. We have about 9% of our school districts across the state who are a part of that, and they have every right to be a part of that lawsuit. But that's not been a secret. That has been very, very public.